They say that talking to yourself is a sign of insanity. But I think that's only if you answer back, right? Right. This is Talking to Myself, the Art Advice podcast where I use anecdotes from my life to try to make myself a better artist and possibly a better person. Other people might find some use in this as well, but mostly I'm just trying to avoid paying for therapy. Today's podcast, I thought I'd focus on the idea of art and craft, what the differences are, what the better one is, if there is such a thing, how people think about these two things, what the division means to trying to be an artist. And I'm mostly inspired by this topic because I listened to a podcast called Ask an Artist with Laura Boswell and Peter Keegan. And they had an episode about the difference between art and craft. And this is this extremely British podcast. They're mostly focused on, when they say art and craft, they have a lot of anecdotes and discussions about people who make quote unquote craft, like furniture, printmaking, things like that, trying to get exhibitions in the National Gallery in London, which is obviously extremely prestigious, capital A art type of institution, and how they constantly refuse to exhibit things that they consider craft rather than art. The main definition of the two seems to be centered around concept and execution. Craftsmanship, in this case, the way they described it, would be the execution of a concept. Craftsmanship is the quality of the stuff you produce and the ability to consistently produce that thing in that quality. Whereas art, in a vague kind of ephemeral cotton candy kind of way, is the concept, the idea, the creativity. But I would also add to the argument of this that the art concept alone is not enough. I know conceptual art is sort of the modern take on art, and a lot of art schools now teach almost nothing except concept. But if you don't know how to realize your concept, if you don't know how to make it into something concrete that people can see and understand, if you're not communicating your concept through craft, it's nothing, you know? If you work in commercial art at all, like I have before, you get hear the idea come up that ideas are a dime a dozen. They don't mean anything. People have dozens of great ideas every day. They mean literally zero unless you can produce something from them that is concrete. And that brings me to the anecdote for this week, which is kind of a small piece. Mostly it's the podcast I was listening to, but also when I was in art school, we had an art show, several actually. This was the first one I remember. So I am a freshman in college, just taking my first few art classes. I was a printmaking specialist, so I was focusing on something that by the people in the podcast definition was more of a craft, but in my particular case, it was more of an art because no one learned printmaking until you got to higher level art classes. In England, apparently, they do lino cuts or rubber sheet printing in grade school. And I think when my mom was a kid or something, they did potato prints, that kind of thing. You cut a picture into a potato and you dip it in ink and slap it down. Basic printmaking stuff. And they didn't have much of that in grade school when I was a kid. So I'm assuming that my concept of printmaking was that it was still an art, capital A type of art. Now, it is more of a commercial type of art because it produces multiple identical, hopefully, copies of the original. The original being a painting, an etching, a drawing, that kind of thing. There are types of printmaking. One of my specialties, in fact, was something called the monoprint, which essentially is just a drawing that you've made a print of that you can only make one print of. The only reason it's a print and not a painting or a drawing is because the method used to finalize it is a printmaking technique. Generally speaking, you use some kind of ink or paint substrate on some kind of plate that is resistant to it, like plastic or metal, and then you print off a piece on the paper, and that takes all the ink off. There's no resistant image left to do additional prints with. So each print is a one-off creation like a painting or a drawing. It's a little weird because if you really wanted to have more control and make one of each thing, you just make a painting or a drawing. But there are certain things about the look of a print that are interesting to the people, and a monoprint looks different from, say, the exact same thing done as a drawing. It would look a little different. The point here is I was working in printmaking, which was considered art, and in the same building, but not in the same course description, were the potters, people making stuff with clay, and they were all first year students too. So they weren't making extreme masterpieces of the art and craft, let's say, of clay fired, kiln fired pottery. They were making bowls and plates and little tiny sculpture things. Nothing serious. But we had this group art show, and they were in the show as well, which I have no problem with. I didn't care. But everyone in the printmaking department got kind of a little on edge because the pottery stuff was selling like crazy, and none of the print stuff was. Looking back, it's probably because a mediocrely made pot or dish still looks more like a piece of art than a badly made print. There's a practicality involved, and there's also a beauty involved with the glazes and things. That it's an artisan object. It's a craft artisan object, which inherently has worth simply because someone made it by hand. Whereas a print, if you're not interested in the subject matter and it's not well done artistically or technically, it's just a dirty piece of paper. And I will admit that I made quite a few of those. But that led us to a discussion, is this an art show or is this a craft show? I mean, it's a dumb kind of thing you say when you're jealous of other people selling stuff at a show when you're not. But it ties into this idea of art versus craft. What's the difference? What's more important? And the podcast came to the conclusion mainly that art without craft is fairly useless, because that would be like pure conceptual art. That honestly it's not possible to make, because to make it an art, you have to communicate it to other people, and that involves some measure of craft. Let's say art with very low-level quality craft, right? Like a badly made performance art piece that doesn't really effectively communicate anything or doesn't say anything. It just kind of meanders, like this podcast. Doesn't come to any good conclusion, doesn't have anything to say. That would be on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum would be pure craftsmanship. And this is an example of, like, say a jeweler, a technical jeweler who's really great at taking someone's design and making the jewelry out of it. They can do amazing things. They can have a grip on all the materials. They know how to turn any kind of design into a real world piece of jewelry, but they can't do any designs, right? It's like the difference between an architect and a builder. The builder will know what works. The builder knows how to turn the plans into something that is real and is solid and safe for people to live in. But without the designs, not all builders, of course, but without the designs, the job of a builder is difficult to do. And meanwhile, the architect, you can make plans all day, but without builders, you still kind of buildings. And you can build a lean-to out of blueprints, but it's not going to hold up against the rain very well. So, of course, you need both art and craft. Even though conceptual artists try to get by with as little craft as possible, and tradespeople and craftsmen can get by just fine, making objects that most people would consider artistic with no, concept skill. They don't need it. I come down around the same place in this discussion. My concept of it is a piece of art doesn't necessarily need to have the best craft to be a good piece of art, but if the craftsmanship is so poor that it takes away from the concept or the ability to communicate the concept, then obviously it's not good. It needs to be good enough that I'm not losing the concept or the communication of the concept. And by virtue of the same thing, something that is pure craftsmanship or pure technical ability leaves me a little flat, because it's not really expressing anything to me. And again, this is also completely subjective. Everyone should make their own opinions about this. If you see a gum wrapper on the ground and it's beautiful and it makes you think of something in your childhood or whatever, that could be art to you. I mean, someone balled it up and threw it on the ground. That doesn't mean they thought about it as a concept and created it, and that was, but it can still feel like art to you personally. Stuff's all subjective. There's no hard, fast rules. I don't know why I'm even doing this podcast. I'm sorry. No, but just maybe think about it. If you're an artist, or even if you're not an artist, think about when you see something incredibly technically well done. It's easy to give that thing a lot of credit because of how well the technical stuff is, how impressive it is. Photorealistic pencil drawings are something that comes to mind. that's great. That stuff is amazing to look at. It's really cool. It's a great expression of a brilliant technical skill. But if it's a copy of a photograph and it looks exactly like the photograph, why does it need to exist if we have the photograph? It's a wonderful exercise. It's a great way to brag, humble brag even, about your skill, but it's not showing me anything that the photograph doesn't show, to me. And the other way around, if you have an amazing concept for, a piece of art, but you don't put any effort into making it, does it even exist? I mean, you can tell someone about it, I suppose, but that's not art. That's just talking to someone about an idea. That's nothing. So we need both. I think we need both. If you want to make a meaningful piece of art or something that is good or fun or interesting, you need both. How much of each depends on, your level of skill, your level of investment in the concept, and what you're trying to express. Complicated things might require more concept work. Things that are that seem simple on the surface but have a lot of layers of meaning might take more technical work. It's hard to say. But I think you have to have both, and I think trying to separate them into one or the other is kind of crap. You should be able to respect the craftsmanship and the work it takes to make something practical, and you can call that art if you want. It doesn't matter. You should be able to appreciate the concept and the expression of experience and communication of a certain idea that you see in an abstract painting. Even if you think at first glance that it looks just slopped together, you look at it a little more, you might see, okay, I see what happens here. There's brush strokes there. I can actually see where his arm swung through here because he's expressing this movement. That kind of stuff's cool too. So it all comes down to, again, personal preference. But I think we need to keep in mind we need both art and craft to make anything meaningful. And if you're looking to make some money at an art sale in first year in college, maybe stick to pottery. Thanks for listening, everybody. I greatly appreciate you being here. Special thanks to my patrons on Patreon. You guys get to hear and see these a week earlier than everyone else, and you are the shiniest people I know. Thank you very much. Till next time, you guys take care. Put the best craftsmanship you can into the best idea you have, and hopefully other people will feel it too. I'll see you next time. Take care.